for Senate Bill 656. And then I'll move on to introduce the team that is working on this project. And they all also have their cameras on, so it gives you a sense of who you're talking to and who's been working for now over 3 years on this project. We'll start with our district director, Gustavo Delarda, Everett Townsend, District 11, our chief deputy, Victor Mercado, who is our acting deputy for design, Stefan Galvez Abadia, our acting deputy director for environmental. Hello. Myself, I'm here. I'm the director of public affairs. Matt Voss, who is our senior environmental planner. Sam Lee, our associate environmental planner, who most of you have seen before and I've heard from. Brooke Celiak, our design manager. Wendy Dandenau, who's one of the original staff members on the project engineer. Chuck Gray, our project manager, we've also seen before. Also joining us, Nick Buenviaje and Yadira Whitney from Public Affairs here at Caltrans. And then our consultant, we're joined today by Stan Collins, who's our suicide prevention specialist and has been advising the team. Ashley Carson, who you've met. Thank you, Ashley. Ashley Hauser, Giuseppe Nespoli, also, and Casey Cloyd, who is helping us with some IT support. So that's all of us here at the meeting today. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you so much, Caridad. Right, if I could get a thumbs up when the slides are visible again. All right, beautiful. Okay, so just as a reminder, we are recording this session and it is now successfully being live streamed. It took me a second to troubleshoot that, so but it does look like we are live. So for the remainder, if you wouldn't mind turning your cameras off and of course making sure that you remain muted, that will make sure that we have a really good experience for those watching, that we can kind of minimize some of that background noise. And we will make sure that the recording does capture the folks who are presenting. And so again, if you wouldn't mind, until, especially for those of us who are just watching on, until we get to the point of the Q&A, again, staying muted and turning cameras off, that would be very, very much appreciated. All right, so we have come such a long way. A quick refresher on some of the key milestones throughout this process thus far. We had the feasibility study that was started in 2017. It was then published, took a bit, and it was published in May 2018. We had our in-person summit, and so it is nice to see some of those familiar faces from way back in April 2019. And we had our first virtual advisory committee kickoff, or meeting one, in May of 2020. So that was our first virtual session, and everyone was so gracious about us needing to pivot at that time. Moving on, we had the scoping meeting later in the summer of June 2020, followed November 2020 with our second advisory committee meeting. And now we are here in October, if we can all believe it, I barely can, with meeting 3 for the advisory committee. So as you see, there are several more dates that are coming up. Chuck Gray is going to discuss those in more detail and also talk through the agendas for several of those additional AC meetings planned, but I'll make sure to save that for him as we get to that point. So before we get into the specifics of the project updates, I'd like to ask Stan Collins, our suicide prevention specialist team member, to walk through some information. So for those of you who have just recently joined this process and who haven't been with us all along, Stan has worked in the suicide prevention field for upwards of 2 decades. He unfortunately lost a close friend to suicide in high school, which just kind of set the trajectory of his career. He utilizes his experience to support and develop strategies to create system-level change around suicide prevention. And he currently works as a consultant in the field of suicide prevention, focusing on technical assistance, creation and implementation of suicide prevention curricula and strategies. As an example, his work includes serving as a subject matter expert in the development and rollout of a Stop Firearm Suicide San Diego campaign, in which he partnered with gun shop owners to coordinate the promotion and awareness of suicide prevention in the firearm owning community. As part of the Coronado team, Stan provides us with expert technical assistance on safe messaging and means safety. So welcome, Stan. We're thrilled to have you back.
Wonderful, and thank you for that warm introduction, and thanks for being here. I want to start. You heard from my short bio that I am a loss survivor, and I want to acknowledge that many of us in this meeting today are also loss survivors, perhaps attempt survivors or those with lived experience. So as we're going through the day, I also just want to ask that you give yourself some space for any emotions that may rise to the surface. And if you need support, I'm going to be sharing some resources. With that, one of the other projects that I work with, Yenny Palomino is here as well, who coordinates the San Diego County Suicide Prevention Council. So I've supported their efforts over the past decade. And I wanted to share this with you. This diagram or this infographic that you see is taken from our San Diego County Strategic Plan for Action Plan for Suicide Prevention. And so as we're having this conversation about a barrier on the Coronado Bridge, I also wanted to paint a picture that this is just one spoke in the wheel. If you look at about 5 o'clock on that dial, you see that means reduction is one of 9 strategies that we have. So we're working in a variety of areas. You also heard that under that umbrella of means reduction or means safety, as I'll be referring to it, we're doing other efforts within San Diego County with the firearm community to reduce access to lethal means for individuals who are experiencing thoughts of suicide. I really would encourage everyone here attending to visit SPC San Diego. Earlier, or I guess last month in September, was Suicide Prevention Week. Every year we release a report to the community to provide an update on the status of suicide and suicide prevention activities, and also to get informed. If you haven't attended a training, we do a training called Question, Persuade, Refer, where you can learn about the warning signs, risk factors, and how to have a conversation and refer somebody to report. So again, all of this just really to say that in San Diego County, we're very fortunate to have the backing of San Diego County and County Behavioral Health to do a tremendous amount of work in suicide prevention. And we're one of the statewide leaders in California regarding suicide prevention. On the next slide, I want to introduce you to some of the terminology or recommended terminology that we use within the suicide prevention field. You often will hear people refer to someone who has died by suicide. We'll hear the terminology that they committed suicide. And we're trying to get away from that phrasing because when we hear the term committed, we oftentimes will associate it with crime or sin. A lot of people are shocked to find out that it used to be illegal to attempt suicide, or that faith institutions are starting to change the way they frame suicide. So rather than using that term, we ask that people use the term died by suicide, died of suicide, or took their own life. It's still very clear what that action and what the result was, but it takes away the stigma, the bias, and the shame that gets associated with crime and sin, thereby creating a barrier for people seeking help. The other one you often hear often will hear is successful versus unsuccessful attempts. And if you break that down, the result of a successful attempt is death, and the results of an unsuccessful attempt are living. And so success really doesn't fit in the context of suicide. So we ask that we refer to these either as a death by suicide or an attempted suicide. And again, it's still very clear what those actions were, taking away the bias and the shame, while still painting a clear picture. We're not trying to shy away from talking about suicide, but just trying to clarify. As we're talking about some of the content today, again, knowing that many of us are lost survivors, we're also trying to get away from the term, you will hear in regards to content warnings, the term this could be triggering for people. Also trying to get away from that because the term triggering can be triggering for folks, and I'll let you connect the dots on that one, going back to the firearm suicide prevention effort I used. And so typically we use the term activating or content warning for any content. Now, people often ask, has this been research, informed to show that this prevents suicides? It has not. There's been a couple studies though, and this is the recommended and respectful terminology when working with people around lived experience with suicide. So just want to introduce those terms. As we're going through the day, they might still creep up. Your brain is going to take a while before you switch the link to change the terminology, but just wanted to ask if possible to use that terminology and explain why I'll be using that terminology today. Now on the next slide, one of the efforts I want to talk about is one of those 9 strategies, it's referred to in the plan as means reduction, more commonly referred to as means safety. As a loss survivor, when I lost my friend, and when we lose people, one of the most common questions we ask is why, right? What is the why behind this? Why did this have to happen? And so a lot of suicide prevention has been focused on the why. How do we reduce risk factors? How do we increase protective factors? But really, the research has shown that the most effective strategy for suicide prevention to reduce suicide deaths and attempts is what we call means safety. So restricting access to lethal means for people who are experiencing thoughts of suicide. And Harvard School of Public Health has the Means Matter website that really dives into some of this research. And over the past few years, we've seen more and more efforts around not just the why, but the how, knowing that if we can restrict access for people who are experiencing those thoughts, they're less likely to make an attempt. And if they are to make an attempt, that it's less likely to be lethal. So that is kind of the framework that I'm going to be speaking to over the next few minutes and trying to lay out for us that paints, hopefully it paints a broader picture of the overall discussion that we're having today. Now on the next slide, one of the most common responses to this idea of restricting access or means safety is, well, won't people just find another way? And it's this kind of kick the can down the road mentality. Well, if we take away the firearm, they're going to go to the bridge. If we put a barrier on the bridge, they're going to use medications. If we take away the medications, as if people are just going to keep passing along. There's a really well-known person in the suicide prevention field named Mike Anestis, and he talks about something called the suicidal image. And what that is that when someone is moving from thoughts of not wanting to be alive to thoughts of suicide to actually creating a plan, oftentimes we develop an image of what suicide would look like for us. And oftentimes people get tied to that. And it's kind of a strange place to go in your head, but many people, if you were to ask them, how would you attempt suicide? Everybody's list would be somewhat different. And there would be things that someone would never think to do and others that people would consider. And this matters because when we take away access to one form of lethal means, substitution is very rare. And if substitution of means does occur, more than likely it will go to a less lethal means, which is really important. And research has shown time and time again, not only does, if you restrict access to one means, does it reduce deaths using that means, but also that suicides overall go down. So people don't just switch, they don't just substitute. And as you see on the screen, there's been numerous studies looking at various types of means and methods that have replicated this. But to reiterate, restricting access to lethal means is one of the most effective strategies that has been research proven to be effective in reducing suicides. Now on the next slide, if we pull some wisdom from other arenas, such as in injury prevention, we'll see that primary prevention is where we want to, and I'm sorry, can we move to the next one? I hope I'm not frozen. There we go. Great. Thanks. So if we pull some wisdom from injury prevention, and this is from a colleague of mine in our guard who did a lot of work in this field, primary prevention is just prevent the event from occurring when talking about bridge barrier. That's what what the intent behind that would be, to just restrict access completely. Now, secondary prevention doesn't really apply in the case of the conversation that we're having today because we know the high lethality rate of a suicide attempt from the Coronado Bridge. But another key component we'll be hearing from first responders later is to either mitigate the effects of that injury, and not just physical injury, but improving the crisis response so that to reduce that trauma. We know that once someone has made an attempt, it can increase risk. But what we also want to remember is that 90% of people who make a suicide attempt will not go on to die by suicide. In fact, 70% of people who make a suicide attempt will never attempt again in their lives. So if we can reduce the lethality, reduce access to lethal means, that person is very unlikely to go on to die by suicide. And so I really want to keep that in mind as we're moving through the conversation of the kind of the why and the how throughout the day today. So on the next slide, we'll see, so what can we do to restrict access to lethal means for people who are experiencing thoughts of suicide? We can put them in a safer environment. We can remove access to lethal means. We can take firearms, prescription pills, relocate them from the home or minimize access. As we're going to discuss today or continue discussing today, we can put a barrier, guns, like I said, gun locks or a barrier from the bridge has been shown to be extremely effective. Another thing that's important to remember is that oftentimes suicide crises are short term. While someone may experience thoughts of suicide over months or years, oftentimes there's only a handful of opportunities or moments in time where that person is really in so much pain that they are capable of making a suicide attempt. And those periods of time are typically 30 to 90 minutes, so time is on our side. With every speed bump that we can put between an individual having those thoughts and access to lethal means, the less likely they are to follow through with that attempt. The instinct for self-preservation will come in. That hope might be found. Those reasons for living might be reminded. And as I talk to this idea of substitution, if someone does substitute, making the attempt less lethal in the hopes that that person will go on to find their reasons for living, get the support that they need. Now, speaking of support, on the next slide, I wanted to share with you some of our local crisis resources. We're really fortunate in San Diego. We have a top tier, the San Diego County Access and Crisis Line. I want everybody to do me a favor, actually. I want you to pull out your cell phones and please take a picture of this slide, or better yet, actually add a new contact in your cell phone. And so the number for the crisis line is 888-724-7240. The way that I remember that number is 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and 0 suicides. There's also a live chat available in the evenings, and that is our local crisis center. On the bottom right, you see the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. By calling the Lifeline, you get routed back to your local crisis center, but I want to let you know that it's based on your area code. So if you have a cell phone from Texas, you will be routed back to a Texas cell phone or a Texas crisis center. So that's why it's even better to have the number to our local crisis center. But there's also times where maybe we're in a situation we don't feel that we can get the words out, or we're in an environment where we can't talk without fear of response from others. And so I also wanted to share with you the crisis text line, a different organization, but rather than picking up the phone and talking to somebody, you communicate via chat with a trained crisis counselor. And as I close out, what I want to emphasize more than anything with these resources is please do not wait for a crisis. If you are struggling and you are just wanting to talk to somebody, if any of the conversation today makes you think about someone that you want to check in with, you can contact the Access and Crisis Line. They can coach you up a little bit, give you the questions to ask, or let's say you have a conversation with somebody and they're having thoughts of suicide. You can contact that resource and they can help find support. So it's not like 911 where an emergency threshold has to be passed. Any circumstances, questions, resources, or just to talk, you're encouraged to contact the Access and Crisis Line. So with that, I'm going to be sticking around throughout the presentation today, and I'm happy to take questions later. But I think that's my time. And so Ashley, I'm going to kick it back over to you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Stan. Just for everyone, we did go ahead and put the numbers, the crisis line, the text line, and the national prevention line. They are in the chat as well. So if you want to go ahead and copy those, and I'd love a Stan's suggestion of just putting that as a new contact in your phone. So you've got ready available information readily available to you for that. Next up, we're going to have the Caltrans District 11 Director, Gustavo Delarda, give us a warm welcome. And so, Gustavo, I'm going to hand the floor over to you and all right, move forward.
All right, thank you, Ashley. Thank you for the introduction, and I would like to also thank Stan for reminding us how to talk about suicide, because words do matter, and also for sharing all the important resources regarding how we can prevent suicides. I would also like to thank all of you for joining us today for the third meeting of the Senate Bill 656 Coronado Suicide Prevention Advisory Committee. We last convened in November of 2020, like Ashley mentioned in a few slides earlier, and we're now in year 5 of 10 on this journey for a suicide deterrent. Since last November, our team has been working to complete the environmental and engineering studies and consultation with regulatory agencies that are required for a project to achieve the critical environmental document milestone. I want to thank all of you for your patience, because sometimes the environmental phase seems to be a little bit long, but we have to follow the environmental federal and state laws to be able to move to the design and construction phase and ensure success of this important project. As stewards of the transportation system, we must also ensure our project meets federal and state highway traffic and design standards. And we have also shared with you the maintenance requirements to ensure the structural integrity of the bridge is maintained. We are finishing now, and we will release the draft environmental document by the end of January of 2022, and the final environmental document by June 30th of 2022. We will be selecting an alternative after the circulation of the draft environmental document. In addition to the environmental laws and highway requirements, state law, Senate Bill 656, requires Caltrans to convene an advisory committee, which is you, to provide input into the selection of the best alternative for a suicide deterrent. We would like to hear from you today, but we would also like to hear from you during the public review comment period of the draft environmental document. Today, you will hear more detail from the team, but let me quickly highlight what Caltrans has done towards earning approval and moving the construction of a suicide deterrent barrier. The team has completed numerous technical, cultural, and historical, biological, visual, environmental, and coastal zone studies. We have also completed required consultation and coordination with several regulatory federal and state agencies, allowing for quicker feedback and completion of our studies. We've worked with first responders, the Navy, the Coast Guard, to ensure the project doesn't conflict or make response, rescue, and recovery more difficult. Today, you will hear that due to these efforts, we're almost complete in determining how to address and minimize environmental effects, including historical, visual, and community impacts. I'll also like to touch briefly upon funding. I'd like to thank Senators Atkins and Hueso for the funding that is allowing us to complete these environmental studies. Next, we will need to find funding to move forward with designing and constructing the project after June of 2022. During this past year, we have been looking for ways to pay for and advance construction of the project. The project is among the state transportation priorities, and we applied for federal congressional direct spending, and we will pursue any funding available in any federal infrastructure or spending bill. Also, the project will be included in the Regional Transportation Plan, and this will facilitate eligibility for federal funding. We need your continued engagement, feedback, and funding ideas to keep on track. You have my commitment, and is demonstrated by the time and heart that our staff is investing in making this project one that will meet the standards and regulations necessary to move on to construction. I will stay for the whole duration of the meeting. I will be happy to take any questions at the end of the meeting. But next, I would like to introduce San Lee, our social environmental planner, and Wendy Dandenau, our project engineer. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Stanley and I'm the Associate Environmental Planner on this project.
Thanks for the introduction, Gustavo. Hi everyone, welcome. My name is really great to have so many of you back with us today. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, I'm glad you're on the team. We've been meeting with you as the advisory committee since May of 2020, and actually with many of you a lot longer than that, before the advisory committee was officially established. And the most consistent and persistent message that we've received in all of that time is that we need to get something up on the bridge as soon as possible. That's a need that our team is in agreement with, because we feel it too, the urgent need for something that can help deter these tragic events. And while the team has always considered this urgency in our decision making, we felt that this project needed to formally acknowledge this critical timing component. The purpose and need of a project is essentially the measuring stick by which decisions on projects are made. And so we decided that, while very unconventional, our project needed to incorporate this temporal element into the purpose and need to further support decisions to implement this project as soon as possible. So in this slide, the original wording for the purpose is in black, and the added wording to emphasize and support the timeliness of our efforts is shown in blue. Our purpose for this project now reads, the purpose of this project is to install a suicide deterrent system in the most timely manner in order to reduce suicides and suicide attempts as soon as is practicable while also reducing the closures of the bridge due to these events. This means that any decisions being made on this project will take into account whether or not it is the fastest path toward implementation while still meeting the rest of the purpose of installing a suicide deterrent that reduces suicides and suicide attempts, as well as closures on the bridge. Another important determination that has been made since we last met are the physical deterrent limits, or where the deterrent will actually begin and end on the bridge. Now, there were many factors that the project development team took into consideration, such as the efficacy of the deterrent, history of the events, impacts to protected resources, the effect of future closures, and vehicle sight distance requirements. Balancing all of these considerations, the project development team adopted the deterrent limits as shown on this exhibit. The physical deterrent will be installed on both sides of the bridge, from the beginning of the bridge on the Coronado side to just above Newton Avenue on the San Diego side.
Now that Wendy's gone over the new purpose statement and the new deterrent limits of the project, I'm going to go over several other updates relating to the environmental process. So to recap, the foundation of this process is based on the requirements of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. These two laws require Caltrans to conduct environmental analysis and to engage the public for the development of the environmental document. Here on the screen is a flowchart of this environmental process. For those new to the advisory committee, I would like to take a moment to go over some of the milestones we've completed on this environmental process. So back in June and July of 2020, we completed the public scoping period, and during that time, we also conducted a virtual scoping meeting and gave the public an opportunity to review preliminary project information and to provide input. After the public scoping period was completed, we started developing the alternatives and technical studies. As you can see in the highlighted area, these two major components in the process happens before the draft environmental document and are cyclical and influence each other. In the next few slides, we're going to go over the list of alternatives and how that has changed since the public scoping meeting and when we last met. So for those who joined us during the virtual public scoping meeting, this slide might look familiar. Initially, we had 4 alternatives, the first being a vertical barrier on the existing railing with 6 different vertical variations, including the wire mesh fence, pivoting wire mesh fence, sliding vertical cable fence, reverse folding wave fence, vertical net, and the horizontal cable fence. The second alternative was a vertical barrier on a new railing with the same 6 different vertical variations. The third alternative was a horizontal barrier consisting of a horizontal net below the bridge, and the fourth alternative was the no build. Because of our structural analysis, coordination with external partners, and findings from the environmental studies, this list of alternatives have changed. So we're going to go over these changes starting with alternative 2, the vertical barrier on a new railing.
So alternative 2, vertical barrier on a new railing, was originally being considered at the beginning of this phase because we didn't know whether or not the project would trigger the need for a new bridge rail due to the impacts of the deterrent. A replacement of the bridge rail would result in significant environmental impacts as well as additional design and cost. Our structures engineers were able to perform a preliminary evaluation that resulted in a high confidence level that the existing barrier or bridge rail can support the newly proposed vertical deterrent fence systems, and therefore we no longer needed to consider replacing the bridge rail. Because of this, we were able to recommend the removal of alternative 2 from further consideration, which meant that the team didn't have to spend any additional time analyzing and studying costs and other impacts that a bridge rail replacement would have had, and instead we were able to focus that time on the other alternatives and moving the project forward. So this left us with both alternative 1, the vertical barrier on the existing railing, and alternative 3, the horizontal barrier, as our remaining build alternatives. The horizontal barrier that we were exploring was a horizontal net similar to what the Golden Gate Bridge is currently installing. But our bridge is very different from the Golden Gate Bridge, both structurally and operationally. For one thing, the Coronado Bridge consists of plate girders and a box girder, while Golden Gate is an open truss system. Because of this difference in the internal structure of the bridge, access throughout the bridge for maintenance and even rescue operations is not the same. Additionally, attachment points for a netting system onto the side of the bridge are also not the same, and due to our bridge's varying structure depths, and the vertical clearance requirements present a challenge. Another consideration is that the horizontal net could provide additional access to the underside of the bridge structure. This is a security concern as the bridge is vital for military traffic to and from Coronado, and threats to the bridge could be considered an act of terrorism. To add to that, our easement rights over the land on the San Diego side are not wide enough to allow a horizontal deterrent to be installed. In this slide, the extent of our easement rights along the bridge are shown in green, and the limits of the horizontal fence construction are shown in red. Because the existing easements are not wide enough to accommodate the horizontal net, new easements would need to be obtained with each individual property owner, resulting in additional time before construction can begin. Another obstacle that we encountered was maintenance access. If you remember from the last advisory committee meeting back in November of last year, we went over the need for lowering equipment onto the scaffolding or quick deck that maintenance uses for painting the bridge. If you imagine a horizontal fence installed between the bridge and the quick deck, you can see how this creates a physical barrier that prevents the lowering of the equipment. The proposed net would need to extend 20 feet out, while the quick deck can only be extended out 16 feet, making the horizontal net a physical obstruction for anything needing to be lowered to the crews below. As much as we brainstormed, ran trial runs with existing equipment, explored new equipment, and even examined alternate access means, we could not find a solution for this. Additionally, there are maintenance impacts that also result from the increased maintenance that would be needed to maintain the horizontal net itself and the challenges associated with these activities. Again, because the quick deck is not able to extend out as far as the horizontal net, specialized equipment, procedures, and expensive contract work would be needed to paint and maintain the net and its support system. In addition to the obstruction for inspection and maintenance, perhaps the most serious consideration with the proposed horizontal net is how the new installation will impact first responders. We have met several times throughout this project with CHP, San Diego PD, Coronado PD, Harbor Police, San Diego Fire Rescue, and Coronado Fire to make sure that we understand their needs, especially when it comes to their response to these incidents. We're fortunate to have representatives from each of these departments here with us today, and we have the opportunity to hear directly from Lieutenant Joe Aboy from the California Highway Patrol, Sergeant John Lavonne with the San Diego Police Department Emergency Negotiation Team, and Deputy Chief Dave Gerboff with San Diego Fire Rescue about their operations, including some of the challenges and obstacles as they relate to the bridge and this project. So first up is Lieutenant Joe Aboy. Lieutenant Aboy, are you ready?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you perfectly. Thanks. Take it away.
Yes, thank you for having me. So I'm Lieutenant Joe Boy. I'm with the San Diego CHP office. I've been with the department for 21 years now, and I've been actually in the San Diego office as a first line supervisor for 7 of those years. And in those 7 years, I've had numerous calls to the midspan for persons in distress or persons who may have jumped from midspan. So I have a lot of experience with many of the calls that we get up there. So really quickly, I just wanted to go over some of the roles and responsibilities that the San Diego CHP has. We have primary law enforcement jurisdiction on the Coronado Bay Bridge. So any calls that come in, they could range from collisions to crimes, pedestrians, vehicles blocking the roadway, and also persons in mental distress, that we would be the first responders towards those calls. Many of the times our allied agencies, such as Coronado Police or San Diego PD, may get the call and may be in position to get there first. If we do encounter a person in mental distress, we would begin some dialogue and some negotiations with that first responder on scene, and we would try to carry on that dialogue until we can get someone with more specialized training to assist with that. Many times we would call the ENT, the emergency negotiations team, to come up and help us. In that case, we would also provide any type of traffic control or closures to the bridge, many of which we are closing the bridge in both directions to help with the negotiations. In the event that someone did jump from the bridge, we would also seek aid from Harbor Police to help in rescue efforts or recovery efforts that they can. So we do maintain incident command for all of these incidents that happen, and we carry that on to conclusion. So that's basically a synopsis of the CHP's involvement in any of these incidents. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Lieutenant Aboy. So next up is Sergeant John Lavonne. Are you ready?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. My name is Sergeant John Lavonne with the San Diego Police Department, and I'm here today representing the Emergency Negotiations Team. I've been asked to present what we're going to cover is the goal of the Emergency Negotiations Team, the types of missions that we go on, and how we do what we do. So with the San Diego Police Department's negotiations team, our goal is to provide incident commanders with trained negotiators. Those negotiators are trained and have experience in incidents involving suicidal persons, barricaded suspects, and hostage takers. We attempt to accomplish this mission through persuasion. The benefit of having us on scene is it helps minimize the use of force. In addition to negotiations, we provide incident commanders with intelligence on the subject and the situation. This information helps the IC make informed decisions. And excuse me, we also provide SWAT intelligence should a tactical resolution be required. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is the organizational chart of who we are and how we fall within our organization. Essentially, we have 3 teams of negotiators. Those teams are on call on a monthly basis and rotate throughout the year. When we're requested and we respond to a scene, what the incident commander is going to get is a San Diego Police Detective Sergeant, who is the team leader. He's going to get 5 to 6 senior San Diego PD detectives, 3 to 4 FBI special agents, 2 to 3 NCIS special agents, 1 to 2 CHP officers that are assigned to the negotiations team, and a chaplain. So what is the benefit of having that group, that large group of people coming out to a critical incident? Next slide, please. So we're a proven alternative to use of force. With the San Diego Police Department, as with all police departments, our highest priority is in the preservation of human life. So what we offer in that, or what we bring to that, is verbal containment. So in simple terms, what that means is while we are speaking with someone, we're distracting them from whatever negative behavior it is they're exhibiting that we're trying to mitigate. A high profile, a recent example of that was a couple of years ago. We had an active shooter at Bankers Hill overlooking Lindbergh Field. And that was such close proximity to the airport, they had to shut the airport completely down in the middle of the day. In the early hour of that critical incident, the only time the active shooter was not shooting was when we were engaged with them through conversation. So again, verbal containment. Another benefit to having the emergency negotiations team on scene at a critical incident is we protect the officers, the department, and the city from emotional and civil liability. Next slide, please. So with all that being said, what are the type of missions that we go on? Our typical responses are any SWAT mission. That would be a hostage situation, armed barricaded individuals, active shooters. We also deploy when requested to suicidal persons, people in distress, people that are at jump risk. And then additionally, we go on high-risk warrants should that need be. That would be, again, with a SWAT type of response. Next slide, please. So our topic of the day is Coronado Bridge, obviously. And this slide here depicts the number of callouts we've had within the last 10 years broken down. We average 1 to 3 requests for callouts at the Coronado Bridge. Now, that does not mean that in each one of these, we made it on scene, we're given a mission by the incident commander. These are the number of times we're requested to respond there. These numbers, additionally, they do not include incidents where first responders arrived on scene, spoke with the individual, and were able to successfully have them someone off the bridge. Next slide, please. So how is it we do what we do? So an important thing to differentiate, you think of negotiator, you think of speaking with someone. One of the most important things we do is we listen. We actively listen to someone. It's important to understand that everyone we're dealing with is in crisis. That crisis can be perceived, actual, or situational. And what we do is we begin at the bottom on active listening here. If you imagine, you think of, visualize a teeter-totter. On one side of the teeter-totter is emotions. On the other side is rational thought. When emotions are high, rational thought is low. So starting at the bottom, as you look at the slide at active listening, we begin by listening to the person in crisis. How did they come to be in this situation? What's going on today? As we listen to them, we're displaying empathy and working our way up towards rapport. What's happening in the background in that time frame, and this is just an overview of what we do. What's happening in the background is time. We're allowing time for that emotion on that teeter-totter to come down and allowing that rational thought to go up. As we continue, and that can take hours, just to get to that level, that can take hours. As we continue up that staircase, we're going to start to see and have some influence on the person in crisis. And that may be as simple, back to the Coronado Bridge, if you have someone who is on the bridge, it may be as simple as, hey, bring one leg in. You know, you're making me nervous on the bridge, bring one leg in, you know, and so we've got a little bit of influence there. We're worried about you. As the rapport and we're working our way up that staircase even more, that rational thought is hopefully rising in the person, the emotions are coming down, and we ultimately are trying to get to that behavioral change. And that would be them ultimately coming in, coming off the bridge. And again, back to our original goal with the police department, our highest priority is on the preservation of human life. So I know that was a very brief overview of what we do, and I'm happy to take questions at the end. But that is our response when requested to respond out to the bridge.
Awesome. Thank you so much, sir. We do have one more first responder that we're going to hear from. And so Chief Gerboth, are you with us? It does look like you're muted, sir. Okay, so I think we might be having a little technical difficulty. And so I think what we'll do is just go ahead and Wendy, are you good to just advance through?
Yeah, we'll continue, and then maybe if he's able to get a better connection, we can hear from him, because I think we're all pretty interested to hear what he had to say as well, right? So, but thank you, Lieutenant Aboy and Sergeant Lavonne, for for that explanation of all of your operations. I think it really helps to hear firsthand some of the challenges that we have to take into consideration and some of the challenges that you're working with. Just in case anyone was wondering, representatives from each of the departments will be available along with the Caltrans team to answer questions at the end of our presentation today, barring connection issues, I guess I should say. So to reiterate some of what we just heard, what we've learned from our previous coordination is that intervention when someone is up on the bridge is very effective, which is another reason why a physical deterrent can really make a difference. Negotiating up on the bridge deck with an individual who is experiencing thoughts of suicide presents the first responders with more options and is far more effective than when the individual is inaccessible. Furthermore, if someone were to jump into the net, there are logistical, jurisdictional, and safety challenges with rescue. When a crisis takes place, a number of agencies respond to the scene. San Diego Fire Rescue would typically utilize their bucket truck to rescue the individual from the net. But this type of rescue and retrieval, as we heard, relies on mutual trust and willingness to surrender, Without that, San Diego PD or Coronado PD would be needed for the negotiation. However, neither police department has the means or equipment to rescue someone that is 20 feet below the bridge deck in a net. Now, that's not to say that these agencies are not able to work together and cooperate, quite the opposite. In fact, we have heard several stories regarding incidents on the bridge where the cooperation of several different first responding agencies led to the rescue of the individual in distress. But there are jurisdictional, training, safety, and liability considerations that prevent this type of rescue, an individual unwilling to be rescued from the horizontal net and make it infeasible.
So Wendy, I think the chief is back.
Oh, perfect. Great. Let's, are
So,
you there?
sir, I just saw your video pop up. Are you still with us? Shoot. We may have missed the window, Wendy. Okay.
I still see his name, but I'm not, yeah, we can't hear him.
Okay.
All right, well, we'll keep trying. Maybe what we'll do is we can, give an opportunity at the end before we do the questions that we might be able to hear from him at that point. Would that work, Ashley?
I think so. We'll keep trying. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So we'll just continue then. So because of all of these reasons, the horizontal net was determined to be infeasible, and the PDT voted to recommend removal from further consideration on this project. So with both alternative 2 and alternative 3 being recommended for removal from further consideration, we were left with alternative 1, a vertical barrier on the existing railing, and the no-build alternative. Alternative 1 still had 6 variations of the vertical barrier. These are the same, although further refined, that we presented in the first advisory committee meeting back in May of 2020. All of these variations are 7.5 feet tall and have framed systems that allow them to be moved and or removed for maintenance access. They are each framed in 8-foot panel sections for maneuverability within a lane closure. And while all of them are removable, most also pivot, slide, or fold to increase the ease of maintenance access.
So as I've mentioned before, developing the alternatives and preparing the technical studies is an iterative process, and they influence each other. This is important because this process is how alternative 1 has changed. On the screen are a few examples of environmental laws that apply to this project. They're all important, and compliance for all of them is required. In order to show that we've complied with these laws, we have to first identify any protected resources, determine if this project impacts those resources, and propose avoidance and minimization measures. So out of the many laws on the screen, there were 3 that were critical for the development of alternative 1. Those 3 are the Scenic Highway Program for visual resources, the California Coastal Act for coastal resources, and the National Historic Preservation Act for cultural and historic resources. These 3 laws all protect one resource, and that resource is the viewshed of the San Diego Bay and their surrounding cities from the bridge. This viewshed includes the bridge user's ability to perceive the setting of the bay and the spatial relationship between the bridge user and the bay itself. Since the viewshed is a protected resource, any obstruction to this would be considered an adverse impact. Within alternative 1, the 5 fence design variations that have the potential to obstruct the viewshed, and thus also have the potential to result in an adverse impact. Since we're required to avoid and minimize adverse impacts, these 5 fence design variations have been recommended for elimination from further consideration. Thus, the one remaining design variation for alternative 1 is the vertical net, which, due to the high transparency and lightweight material, would not obstruct views of the bay and would not potentially result in an adverse impact. Once we've made that determination, that the vertical net would not adversely impact the viewshed, as well as other environmental resources, we conducted early external coordination with our partners and regulatory agencies to obtain their input and support. These include several federal, state, local groups, including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the California Coastal Commission, the State Historic Preservation Officer, both City of San Diego and Coronado, the Chicano Park Steering Committee, the Save Our Heritage Organization, and also all of you here. We invite you as members of Senate Bill 656 Advisory Committee to share with us your thoughts and to ask us questions about the vertical net. There's time at the end of this meeting for discussion, as well as the public review period of the draft environmental document. So to summarize, the 5 fence design variations on the existing railing, the vertical barrier on a new railing, and the horizontal net have all been recommended for elimination from further consideration due to structural infeasibility, maintenance and first responder conflicts, as you've heard from Wendy, and significant environmental impacts. Now, the only remaining build alternative that meets the purpose and need of the project and avoids significant adverse impacts is the vertical net on the existing railing. But getting to this point took a lot of time, analysis, and revisions. To ensure that the vertical net does not have an adverse impact, we've made several refinements to it, and I'm going to pass it back to Wendy to go over some of those refinements.
Thanks, Sam. So one of the important features that Sam discussed was the view shed from the bridge. The wire mesh netting material being proposed for the vertical net helps to preserve the view shed because it's more transparent than the wire mesh that was being considered for many of the other vertical variations. And to further minimize impacts to the view shed, the heavy rigid framing around the fence panels is being replaced with a much lighter cable perimeter. Much wider post spacing is also being incorporated to further minimize obstructions to the view caused by the vertical posts. The wider post spacing also minimizes impacts to the existing bridge rail by requiring fewer connection points into the barrier. This means less material disturbance and better preservation of the bridge rail as part of this historic bridge. Another way that we're reducing the connection points is by incorporating a continuous top plate on top of the existing bridge rail. This top plate, shown in blue in this rendering, is attached to the existing anchor bolts and is then able to provide attachment points anywhere along the top of the bridge rail at any interval without requiring that new holes be drilled into the barrier. As an added bonus, this top plate also provides connection points for the painter's quick deck and containment curtains, which the vertical deterrent will be impacting. Now, while this new design concept helps us to minimize many of the impacts, it also presents us with some additional challenges. The properties of the steel netting material and flexible cable perimeters prevent the lowering or efficient removal of the fence panels. Because the netting has a memory, so to speak, it will try to contract back into its compressed shape once it's no longer tensioned along the installed fence. This means that our maintenance forces or a contractor would have to completely reinstall the panel each time that it was removed, first stringing and tensioning the top and bottom cables, then spreading out the net onto the cable frame, and finally tensioning the net all the way around in multiple passes. This is a labor-intensive and time-consuming process that would not be feasible within the short closure windows that are allowed on the bridge. In addition, the flexibility of the material makes it subject to injury and, per one of the manufacturers, would become stretched or deformed and no longer perform properly after being removed and reinstalled more than 2 to 3 times. To help us solve these issues, maintenance really went above and beyond, running trials on their equipment to refine the necessary clearances to give us every last inch that we could work within. They also helped us brainstorm alternate ways to inspect and maintain the bridge that will ultimately result in more work and longer hours, but will still be feasible. Because of their efforts, we were able to determine that a stationary fence, one that is not easily removed and replaced, will still be feasible on our bridge. Another consideration with the new concept is that the flexible cable perimeter, along with the wider post spacing, results in a sag within each fence panel. To counter this, the posts and fence attachment points will have to be higher to still maintain the minimum 7.5-foot fence height throughout the panel. But this additional height also has an impact on maintenance and inspection operations, and so we'll keep engaging them through the design process to make sure that the deterrent doesn't prevent their access to the structure. There's one more design update that I want to share with you today. It's in regards to some additional scope or additional improvements that we'll need to incorporate into the project as a result of this stationary vertical net design. You may remember from our last advisory committee meeting that we talked about the Underbridge inspection truck, or UBIT access for the fracture critical inspections mandated by FHWA to be performed every 2 years. To comply with the requirement, the inspectors need to be within an arm's reach of certain elements within the open bays. And to do this, the first arm or boom of the UBIT needs to be lowered down very close to the bridge rail to provide the reach needed. With a vertical net in place, the first arm of the U-bit will not be able to be lowered, and the inspectors will not have access to the elements within the upper sections of the open bays. Instead, that first arm will need to remain above the vertical net, providing less reach within the bridge and preventing required inspection. So this is a typical cross-section of the bridge with the vertical net installed up on the bridge deck on the sides. It shows the 3 open bays underneath, consisting of the 2 outer bays and a center bay. Now, I wanted to also share this photo of one of the outer bays to help you visualize our challenge in providing access. Underneath this bay, there is a 200-foot drop to the water below, and we had to figure out how the inspectors might be able to safely reach the elements within this bay that need to be inspected, since the U-bit would no longer be able to reach them. What we have concluded is that by enclosing the bottom of the bays with a grate flooring, the inspectors can safely use ladders and scaffolding to access the elements inside of the bays on foot. Now, this new access method will inevitably add time to their inspection, but providing a safe alternate means of access was necessary. Not all of the open bays in the bridge, however, will need to be enclosed. Based on the girder height in each span, we were able to narrow down which spans would need all 3 bays enclosed and which spans would only need the 2 outer bays enclosed. In addition, the first 3 spans from the Coronado side and the box girder spans of the bridge will not need to have any bay enclosure work. And to give you an idea of what these bay enclosures might look like, this is a before and after rendering of the enclosed bays in spans 16 and 17, the transition spans to the box girder. Since these are the deepest open bay girders, all 3 bays will need to be enclosed to provide the necessary access to elements within these spans.
Now I'm going to go over the current status of the environmental process. So with the technical studies completed and the project proposing to move forward with only one build alternative, the next step is the environmental document. We're currently preparing and ready for finalizing the draft environmental document for public circulation and review. Here is a table of all the environmental study areas in the draft environmental document. The analysis in these sections demonstrate how the project complies with the many environmental laws that pertain to this project. And while all of these resources are very important and they'll all be evaluated and documented in the draft environmental document, there are 4 resources I would like to focus on since there have been major changes in the level of impacts. These 4 resources are biological resources, cultural resources, visual resources, and coastal zone resources. For our biological resources, we initially scoped the project to potentially impact migratory birds and eelgrass, since work may have been needed in the San Diego Bay. But due to our pre-coordination efforts, it's been determined that further consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and California Fish and Wildlife Department will not be needed. This is because currently it is determined that the project will not impact listed species such as eelgrass and California leastern, and will not impact migratory birds and raptors, including the peregrine falcons currently nesting on the bridge. For cultural resources, during the initial scoping, impacts to character-defining features and the integrity of the historic district were anticipated and would have resulted in an adverse effect. The historic district includes the Glorieta Toll Plaza, the I-5 SR-75 connectors, and the bridge itself. Due to the several refinements that Wendy had previously gone over in the scope additions and our coordination efforts with external partners, including the State Historic Preservation Officer, other state and local agencies, local historical groups, and interested parties, the project impacts were reduced to a finding of no adverse effect, with standard conditions consistent with the Secretary of Interior's standards of rehabilitation. Currently, the State Historic Preservation Officer had concurred with our Historic Resources Evaluation Report, and we will be obtaining concurrence for the finding of no adverse effect with standard conditions prior to the final environmental document. Also, we will be preparing to downscope the Section 4 of analysis from an individual to a de minimis. For visual and aesthetic resources, during the initial scoping, high visual impacts to scenic vistas from the bridge and moderate to high impacts to desired views of the bridge were anticipated. Due to our coordination with the architectural historian for the project, we've ensured that the scenic views and the historical elements will be maintained. So our current status is the visual impact assessment has been downscoped from advanced to moderate. For coastal resources, our coordination efforts and analysis have resulted in ensuring that public access to coastal resources and recreation will be maintained, and that also impacts to environmentally sensitive habitat areas, or ESHA, will be minimal. For ESHA, one example is migratory birds. The project is not anticipated to impact them since migrating birds tend to fly over the bridge, and any new features are not anticipated to increase the surface area of the bridge significantly. For marine resources such as water quality and wetlands, the San Diego Bay would not be impacted since water access for construction is not needed and a containment system will be used to prevent debris from falling into the bay. For visual and aesthetic resources, impacts to views of coastal resources both from and to the bridge would be minimized due to the high transparency of the vertical net and using materials that blend with the surroundings, like Wendy was saying for the refinements earlier. As for current status, we have been working closely with the Coastal Commission staff, and we will be obtaining a coastal development permit prior to construction. As for the several other environmental resources areas, those have already been determined to have less than significant impacts early in the project, and that has not changed. Now that the project as a whole has no adverse impacts to any environmental resources, we're in the process of downscoping both the NEPA and CEQA document. For NEPA, instead of an environmental assessment, we are proposing to prepare a categorical exclusion. And for CEQA, instead of an environmental impact report, we are proposing to prepare an initial study with a mitigated negative declaration. So with those changes, what are the next steps in the environmental process? Once the draft environmental document is prepared, we'll be circulating it for public review and commenting. During that time, we'll also be hosting a virtual public meeting to discuss the project and the environmental document in more detail. We'll also be available to answer questions and receive live comments. The public review period and virtual public meeting is targeted to be early 2022. For more updates, you can join our distribution list by contacting the project email or by following us on social media. Any updates to the project will also be posted on the project website, as you can see on the screen. Once the 30-day public review period is completed, we'll be compiling all of the comments received and responding to comments as needed. Also, this is when we will be selecting the preferred alternative. Even though we are currently proposing only one build alternative and one no build, it isn't until after the public review period that we can officially go through the selection process. Once all of that is done, we will start preparing the final environmental document with the goal to complete it by June 2022. Now I'm going to pass it over to Chuck.
Thanks, Sam. So hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chuck Gray, the project manager. Today I'll be talking about the advisory committee meeting schedule and path forward. Looking at the screen, our first two meetings are both marked as complete, as shown in the left two columns, while today's meeting is summarized in the right column. Today, we provided updates and new information regarding key topics of interest, including information regarding the draft environmental document and our overall progress. As a result of downscoping the environmental document, we're also able to reduce the public review period from 45 days to 30 days. When we met with you prior, we presented meeting with the advisory committee one more time before Caltrans selects the preferred alternative. At the time, there was multiple build alternatives and build variations to consider, making the selection process very complex. Now that we're proposing one build alternative and one no build alternative, the selection process has become greatly simplified. Therefore, we are now proposing to hold the next advisory committee meeting in mid-2022 after Caltrans has selected the preferred alternative. As previously presented, Caltrans' selection of the preferred alternative will occur after the public review period. However, now before the next advisory committee meeting, Caltrans will take into account all public and stakeholder input. That includes input from the advisory committee through the end of the 30-day public review period. The chosen alternative will best meet the project purpose and while also considering economic, operational, maintenance, and environmental factors. After the decision is made, we will share with the advisory committee which alternative was chosen. After achieving this major milestone, we will begin working on the final environmental document. It is during this time in mid-2022 that we're now planning to meet with you again. At our next meeting, we will provide project updates and information regarding the remaining steps to the final environmental document. In accordance with Senate Bill 656, the advisory committee service will officially conclude. However, looking at the far right column, after the final environmental document is approved, we are planning to hold one more meeting in late 2022 to provide a project status and to discuss next steps. Hopefully by this time, we will have secured additional funding to keep this project moving forward. Looking at our path forward, we will be completing the draft environmental document. The public review period and public hearing meeting will occur early next year. The draft environmental document and meeting information will be posted on the Caltrans project webpage located at the shown web address. The project webpage address can also be found in today's meeting agenda, and for your convenience will also be posted on today's meeting chat. Furthermore, information regarding the public review period will also be posted via Caltrans social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Lastly, we're planning to hold the next advisory committee meeting in mid-22 after the 30-day public review period and after Caltrans has selected the preferred alternative.
Okay, so before we jump into Q&A, I wanted to just check in with Chief Grabath to see if he was back with us and give him an opportunity to review a couple of his points. So Chief, are you?
I think so. I apologize. I had some pretty significant technical difficulty. I thought I was in a good connectivity. What I did here, I think you were able to convey the concerns we had from the fire rescue department. The rescue that took place in May of 2020 was very similar to exactly the type of rescue that would need it if there was a horizontal barrier. But since it looks like you won't be presenting that option, then we don't have any further concerns.
Okay. Well, thank you. I apologize for the technical challenges. We really do appreciate you joining us today. Okay, so let's go ahead and commence with the Q&A. So I think there was only one or two questions that were in the chat. There was a question about the sharing of the PowerPoints and the recording. So definitely the recording will be posted. And so Caridad, I know it will take a few days for us to get that spooled and do a little editing to it, but I believe the intent is to post it within the next couple of weeks, correct?
I believe that as soon as the recording is over, it's already available instantaneously on our YouTube site. So yes,
Okay.
we'll send you the link. We'll send you a package.
Okay, perfect. All right. I'm going to lean on some of my colleagues to see if there were any questions that had popped into the chat earlier. None of them jump out immediately. Just as a side note, we've got the crisis line and all of the social media links and the project website in the chat. So if you want to grab that, please feel free. Oh, Amy Hayes. So Amy, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, thank you. I just wanted some confirmation that the alternatives that have been removed will be included within the environmental document. And can you just note where they would be located within there? I think it's important for the public and everyone to understand why these alternatives have been dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. This is Stefan Galvez, Deputy for Environmental. We will include in the draft document the rationale for the elimination for the different alternatives. So right here in this meeting, we sort of laid out our rationale, try to summarize the different assessments and our conclusions. So we'll go ahead and include that information to the extent feasible in the environmental document. And how we were able to, number one, downscope the environmental document as a result of minimizing those impacts, as well as the input that we have received on our assessments that will lead us to recommend the elimination of those alternatives from consideration. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I do also just have one more question, if I might. I'm
definitely. Go
curious,
ahead.
during one of the meetings, there was discussion about putting a mock-up on the bridge with regard to the mesh netting. And so I'm just curious if that was done and if there's images that can be shared either at this meeting or online or at this point. Thank you.
Chuck or Wendy, do you have information on that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, as far as a mock-up goes, we are planning on doing a mock-up in the one phase. There has been some discussion of actually not doing a mock-up on the bridge, just for concerns of possibly attracting attention or unwanted attention, but we haven't conducted that yet.
Okay. It looks like we have a hand from Amy Liepert or Liepert.
I'm sorry, Ashley, because I think that it was kind of a two-part question, right? The other question from Amy was about the visual simulation. So, in our environmental document, I believe that there's already one that was, or some views that have been developed. So we'll try to include those visual simulations, or we'll have that information in the draft environmental document. So yes, there will be some views in there.
All right. So Amy Hayes, did we adequately answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And for the record and for our other participants, will you remind us of the organization from which you're calling?
Of course, yes. I'm here today on behalf of Save Our Heritage organization. I'm the Senior Historic Resources Specialist. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I apologize for not asking you sooner.
No problem.
Okay, so I believe we can now switch over. We have another Amy who has a hand up, and would you please unmute and let the group know who you are before you ask?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Amy Lippert. I'm a trauma surgeon at UCSD Health, the Level 1 trauma center serving the part of San Diego, including the Coronado Bridge. I think we've just passed about maybe a month ago, the 1-year anniversary of my personally taking care of a suicide patient that I worked very hard to save and unfortunately was unable to do so due to the extreme nature of his injuries. Quite frankly, it was a miracle he made it into the trauma center, but it was unsalvageable, the injuries that he sustained. So this has become quite personal to me, even though I'm a relatively new transplant to San Diego. My comments are in relation to, I think, comments I've made in the past regarding timing, and I really wanted to thank and point out the emphasis placed today on the importance of getting an actual done project in place. Of course, with the respect of all the regulations and having everyone's opinion in place. But I guess my question goes to, as much as there's sort of been a reframing of the purpose statement and that sort of thing, from my memory serving me, I don't see that the timelines have been moved up. And I apologize if I've mistaken in that, but I would just be curious if someone could readdress that if it's already been addressed today. If they haven't been moved up, are there options or possibilities to move them up? And then the other small point that I'm concerned about is the source of funding for the actual project. Is that a risk of delaying the actual implementation and installment of the project? And what's the plan to further obtain the funding to ensure that this goes to completion?
I'll go ahead and take this question, Ms. Amy. This is Victor Mercado. I'm the current district division chief for the Office of Design. And so your first question is about the time frame. Originally, we had made the commitment that we would complete this project within 10 years from the beginning stages was 2017, and that we're still on track to have a completed project by 2027. Again, this is assuming that we're going to secure the funding for the design and the construction. And then now the second part of your question, does that answer the second part of your question, or?
Partially, I guess I'm looking for potentially maybe just a little bit more detail to dive into that. So we're sort of emphasizing the need to get the project to completion and to speed that up wherever possible, but we haven't changed the actual deadline for implementation for 10 years for 2027.
No, we haven't. We're still that, but like as our district director Gustavo Delarda mentioned in the front, we're still planning to secure the funding for the construction and for the design.
Yeah, and if I may jump in, Amy. So one of the reasons that is hard for us to basically say we can get this done earlier than 2027 is what you highlighted in your question, that we have money basically to complete the environmental studies through June of next year. And then there is no money for the next phase. So once the environmental document is done in mid next year, if we have funding for the design and construction of the vertical net alternative, there is a possibility that the schedule could be accelerated, but it's hard to commit to that without having the funding at hand. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we did submit the project for federal congressional spending possibilities. One of the things that we heard is that it would help if the project is included in the regional transportation plan. So we coordinated with SANDAG to make sure that in the new plan that they're going to approve on December 10th, this project is included in the plan. So we will continue, even while we are finishing the environmental document, we will continue trying to chase the dollars needed to design and construct this. But until we have them, it's hard to say what's going to happen after June.
Sure, and I greatly appreciate the complicated nature of securing funding. I can only imagine what a headache that is for so many of you. But I'm really honored and impressed by all of my colleagues around San Diego, particularly from EMS and other public service, myself from the health system, who see the true impact of this. And I'm looking for an opportunity to volunteer my time or efforts behind any sort of public outreach or advocacy outreach. And it would encourage my other professional EMS colleagues, as I'm sure they'd be willing to do, to join me in that in any way that we can help support that and push this funding through. And if there's even a subcommittee that would be willing to work on that. And then finally, reaching out to Senator Hueso's office, potentially, I'm sure they're very engaged and interested in helping to make sure that this moves forward. I think you said Senator Atkins as well.
Yes, thank you, Amy, for your advocacy. And as Carrie that mentioned, and she introduced at the beginning of the meeting, there are a lot of elected officials that are following this project. So I'm hopeful that when the time comes, we will be able to identify funding.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Liepert. It does look like we have another question from Rhonda Heiston in the chat regarding the cost of the vertical net. And so curious, Rhonda, if the discussion has answered that for you, or if there's another detail you're looking for us to elaborate upon.
Well, I suppose it just piggybacks on what the doctor was just saying, in that if we can do anything in advance to try and secure the funding so that we can make sure that you guys have it, that's my reason for asking the question. And the question was, has anybody talked about how much a vertical net is actually going to maybe cost?
Yes, we have. Chuck, do you want to expand on that?
Sure. So we don't have an exact number. We're currently actually preparing an estimate for the vertical net, and accommodating that vertical net, as we were talking about in the presentation today, there is the bay enclosures, And then in prior meetings, as part of this project, we didn't go into detail today, but there's also the additional cameras that we're proposing to add to the bridge to help with monitoring, and then the vehicle detection station, so we can help monitor what's going on, again, around the structure if there is an event. And then we're also factoring in the cost of actually designing this to get it so we actually have some stamp plans that we could issue to the contractor to move to construction. When we look at that, all of those components together, our current range right now that we're looking at is somewhere between 75 million and $100 million.
Thank you.
Okay, and Rhonda, for the record, would you also mind please introducing yourself?
Most definitely. I am the founder of Coronado San Diego Bridge Collaborative for Suicide Prevention.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And next up in the chat, we have a question from Raquel Maiden. And Raquel, would you mind introducing yourself first before asking your question, please?
Sure. Raquel Marquez Maiden. I am a resident of City of San Diego. My question is, how are we going to engage public input during the public outreach process, not just on social media, but any other outreach that we have going on? And I understand the period's shorter, 30 days. So I wanted to see if there was a specific plan or timeline for public input.
Okay, great question. And so Stefan, San, who wants to try and address this one?
Well, maybe I could just get it started, and maybe Caridad could also contribute. So as you know, as part of the environmental process, we will be distributing the environmental document and convening a public meeting for receiving that information and engagement from the public. And then there will be that comment period where we will be receiving the information from the public. Specifically about how we are going to reach out to the public, we do have a list of individuals, and we will be sending that information out there. We'll be doing that also on our website, but there will be some additional efforts that I'm going to let Caridad talk about a little bit more.
Thank you, Raquel. So in addition, I think because it's sort of this awkward time where we're doing some virtual and in-person meetings, we definitely will do what's required by CEQA and NEPA. And then we actually have to do probably some one-on-one meetings and reaching out to the Barrio Logan Planning Committee, certainly to the business district. There's a number of organizations we've identified that we need to go keep talking to. The Chicano Park Steering Committee, we've also been talking to. So it'll probably be a lot of phones and calls and asking for soliciting comments and letting folks know that the draft environmental document is out, doing that in English and Spanish, and then explaining to folks in those conversations that that 30-day period is a time when we really need people to weigh in writing and tell us their opinion. And then we'll have that second opportunity. It's not a weigh-in, but letting folks know at the end of June when the final document is available. And assuming assuming or hoping that we're out of the pandemic, we'll be able to be more robust in our outreach on both sides of the bridge, and do more in-person meetings and one-on-one conversations with folks. But
I appreciate that. And it's nice to hear that you're involving other groups that are impacted as well. So that was my kind of the take I wanted to hear, that it wasn't just social media related, but that we were going to get some of the groups that have been voicing their opinions all along to the table. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we did have a hand from Yenny Palomino. Yenny, if you still, I just saw your hand go back down, so I don't know if your arm got too tired. But if you still have a question, we'd welcome you to ask. And if so, it would be lovely if you could introduce yourself first.
Yeah, definitely. Good afternoon, everyone. Yenny Palomino with the San Diego County Suicide Prevention Council and Community Health Improvement Partners. And I basically am just really kind of trying to make sure that we're all still on the same page, because this update feels like, we've been able to move forward, but it also seems like majority, if not all of the options were dropped. So it kind of looks like it's down to a version or no version. So I'm just trying to figure out, are we still on the same page with this actually happening? And we're not just kind of going through a process to say that nothing is going to work and we're not going to do this? Or are we still on board to actually get something going? Because to the point of the others, I would want to already start conversations on fundraising if that's going to be what's going to hold us up. I do want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to input on it so that, you know, people have the say, as was being mentioned. A lot of people have already put a lot of input into it. They have a lot of dedication. People have already been waiting decades for something to go up on the bridge. And so I would just hate for all of us to have gone through 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 years and then end up with no bridge, no money, and no outcome. So, you know, just some reassurance that we're actually all still on the same page to make it work one way or the other, because we really need this bridge to go up to save lives.
Right, understand. Great question. So who on the PDT would like to address this?
You know, Yenny, I guess I would say that I think the point of this meeting, and I think you heard our commitment from our director that we're committed to doing a project. We do have to walk it through all of these processes. And I think because we're crossing our I's and dotting our T's, that we're walking down the right path to make it happen. That's all the assurance I can really give you, but we're all very committed.
Yeah, if I may just add, I think that the proposed elimination of many of the alternatives is not a bad sign. It's actually a good sign, because it means that we were able to narrow this down to one alternative that is going to be able to achieve the same object a lot quicker, a lot more effectively. So we still need to go through the environmental process, which includes releasing the document for comment and receiving comments, not just on that alternative, but also on the no-build alternative. But we are committed to continue moving this project forward to the extent that we can, and hopefully we will be able to select an alternative early next year, a build alternative next year, and move to the design and construction phase as soon as we have the funding for that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And it does look like we have another question in the chat from Dr. Liepert, specifically regarding how the cost compares to the mitigation project on the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, so our understanding is that the mitigation project for the Golden Gate Bridge is over $200 million. I think it's around $211 million. So our current estimate, our range is about half that cost. The Golden Gate mitigation is a little bit different. So it is two different types of projects, both achieving the same goal.
Just what, if I could add just something, Dr. Lippert, the two projects are completely different. As we mentioned, as Wendy and Chuck mentioned earlier in the presentation, the actual physical barrier is triggering other improvements that need to be done to the structure. So the barrier itself it's really not the major cost of the bridge. Is really more like the improvements that need to be done to the structure itself that are the driving cost for the project.
Okay, I don't see any additional hands and I don't see any additional questions in the chat. Is there anything else that the advisory committee would like the PDT to address? Any follow-on questions that we can answer? Oh, Shannon.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to confirm, I think I know the answer from the way that the information was presented, but I just wanted to hear it stated directly. I would assume that the addition of the enclosed bays to the scope of work is not anticipated to result in potential new impacts to migratory bird species. I'm guessing from the way it was presented that that's the case, but I just wanted to hear confirmation.
Shannon, thank you for your question. It is not anticipated right now. We have been consulting with the different agencies, and to the extent that we identified those avoidance and minimization measures, both during construction as well as project implementation long-term, will make sure that, there's not a new level of impact. Right now, there's no indication that that's going to be the case.
Great.
And again, all
Thanks for
that
confirming.
information is going to also be presented in the environmental document. And since we also will be getting a coastal development permit, I am sure that it will be going over that information over and over again to ensure that we meet all those requirements. Okay.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
And for the record, I forgot to say that I'm from the California Coastal Commission. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Okay. I don't see any additional questions in the chat. I don't see any additional names. So we'll give it another few seconds for folks, and I'm sure I know we're wrapping just a hair early. Usually people aren't upset about that. Usually they're just upset if we go over time. So far so good. If there aren't any additional questions, then I would like to invite Stan Collins back just to close us out with another reminder about the resources that are available. So Stan?
Yeah, sorry, I was just not quick on the draw.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for the conversation today, and to bring it back to the resources, just want to remind everybody about those, the Access and Crisis Line 888-724-7240. And most importantly, again, don't wait till a crisis occurs. If you or someone is struggling, please reach out and get that support. So thank you again for all the conversation today.
All right, with that, I'm going to leave these slides open for just another minute. So if you didn't have an opportunity to take a screenshot with your phone, you have a moment again to do so. There's also, we put the numbers again in the chat if you want to grab those and create a contact in your phone. Right. Well, if there aren't any other final questions, or if there isn't anything else from the team that you'd like to share, I just want to say thank you so much for making time in your busy schedules to meet with us today and get an update on the progress for the project. And we're all, there's a lot that has gone into this, and so we're really just grateful that you made the time. Great. If there isn't anything else, I'll just invite the Caltrans team if there are any closing words that you'd like to share. Otherwise, I think we're all ready to, or close to, ready to adjourning.
Just want to say thank you for everybody in attending, and then just a reminder, at any time that you guys have any questions or need a status update on the project, you can always reach out to our public information office, and we'll be glad to give you an update on the project. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to thank all the presenters, our partners, members of the advisory committee, and also the public that is following us on the YouTube broadcast. Thank you for being here today, and look forward to hearing from you early next year when we circulate our draft document. And thank you for collaboration in making this project a reality.
All right. Well, if there isn't anything else, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and we'll be adjourned for the day. Thank you again, everyone. And again, if you need any assistance from the Caltrans team, we have those resources in the chat if you want to grab them, as well as all of the crisis lines and whatnot. So, all right. Thanks again. Take care. Stay safe. And we'll be.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.